Venkatesh caught up with another former RBI governor, Rangarajan, at that very event. Take a look.
I have caught Dr. Rangarajan, former governor of the Reserve Bank, at the book launch of the other former governor of Reserve Bank, Rangarajan. Rajan has just released his book, I Do What I Do, and a few questions on what he did with probably his guru, Dr. Rangarajan. Well, first of all, Dr. Rangarajan, thank you very much for joining us. One of the things that both Rangarajan and the current governor have done together is putting in that monetary policy committee and the monetary policy framework and what they call flexible inflation targeting. What's the record so far? Is that an institution that has worked well?
In my opinion, the concept of inflation targeting is appropriate. I have always stood for inflation control, price stability as the major objective of monetary policy. Everything else follows from it. It is not as if that inflation targeting means the exclusion of other objectives. The underlying principle is that even for sustained economic growth, price stability is required, and therefore inflation control or price stability is important. We talk about price stability, but we need to give some content to the concept of price stability, and that is where inflation targeting comes. That is, the inflation should be controlled at some particular level. Okay. So there are issues relating to what type of inflation, wholesale consumer price, at what level, whether it is 4% or something less, and so on and so forth. But as far as the concept is concerned, it is good, and the margin that is allowed around the inflation target gives it a certain amount of flexibility, gives it a certain amount of maneuverability, and it is not absolute. Therefore, in my opinion, it has worked, and if this policy is pursued, perhaps, in my opinion, India will also settle down to a lower level of inflation than it had been used to.
Well, I will have reason to come back to this because I want to ask you about the impact on growth and the current GDP number which was recently announced. But before that, the other set of things that this governor is following, that Governor Patel is doing is to restructure NPAs. Now, Governor Rajan started it by recognizing forcibly the NPAs on the books of banks by his asset quality review. And now the current governor has marched those cases to the bankruptcy court, both of them perceiving that the banks are not doing what they ought to do, and therefore the central bank is forced to do. Your comments on this, both the recognition and the forcible restructuring?
Well, the recognition means that the identification has been done, and therefore the question really is, what is the best mechanism in order to realize, in order to get something out of these identified assets. Now the bankruptcy code has now been passed. The law has become operative. Therefore, one of the things that we could not do earlier was to take them to the insolvency court. Now, sometimes this is acts only like a threat. Now, perhaps the very decision to go to the insolvency court may compel them to come to some understanding, to come to some situation in which they would be willing to take some haircut themselves and settle the loan. Therefore, I think having passed that law, not to make use of it is really to defeat that particular law. Therefore, I think the Reserve Bank has been wise to do it. The whole question now is, how will the companies react to it? What the courts will also do, that is also becoming an issue. But this is one route which should be utilized.
To be fair, in a recent judgment, the Apex Court has backed the bankruptcy code in the innovative case. So let us hope at the moment there is a buy-in from everyone. But let me come to the other part in the book. Obviously, there is no chapter on demonetization. There is just one speech where the governor remotely alluded to it at that time. That is when he was governor. But in the introductory chapter, Rajan says that the cost-benefit analysis of demonetization didn't work for him. Now we know, on hindsight, what is your own cost-benefit analysis?
Well, as a concept, it is not a bad idea. I mean, I think it is one of those options available for neutralizing the unaccounted income or black money. But one has to recognize that demonetization, even as a concept, has its own limitations. It addresses only the unaccounted income held in the form of currency. It does not do anything about further accumulation. Therefore, the limitations are there. Therefore, demonetization can never be a standalone measure. But even as in its limited range, the whole question is how well prepared the authorities were. In my opinion, had the authorities been better prepared, much more would have come out of this proposal.
Okay.
Because the available currency was not equal to the demand, they had to give almost 2 months' time to allow the people to deposit the old currency. That is too long a time. That is a long time in which many things could be done. Therefore, had the authorities been better prepared, in my view, that the measure itself would have had the more desirable effect. But
should it,
there are
if it is
other
85% of the currency had to be changed, people also needed time to walk it out, stand in queues. Banks needed time to collect it. It was all. Do you think that 2 months were given only because they didn't have enough currency to replace, or is it that they would need that?
No, if on day one they had all the currency, then the time taken is only the physical act of transferring. But then it was very clear, even at the end of 2 months, there were problems and so on and so forth. Therefore, to repeat, as a concept it is good. It is one of the instruments available for neutralizing accounting income. Had they been better prepared, it would have given us more better results. Also, of course, there are some gains over the long period. That gains we will have to see, because if a large number of people have deposited money which they are not able to account for, there would be a benefit to the society. But that is in the future. And therefore, the income tax authorities will have to act briskly in order to identify the people and bring them to book, so to say. But that will take time. So the reduction in the usage of cash is a good measure. For example, people talk about the increased cost of printing the new notes. But if actually the notes in circulation come down substantially, you will recoup it in the subsequent years.
Absolutely. But the immediate problem is that we had, a 6.3% GDP growth in the third quarter, the demonetization quarter. Then in the Jan-March quarter, it fell to about 5.7%, I mean the GVA. And the GVA in the April-June quarter has fallen to 5.6. Would you say that some of it at least is due to demonetization and therefore the upfront cost is justified?
Well, if you look at it in GVA, the last quarter and the last quarter last year and the first quarter is more or less the same. But then, as you all know, and as everybody has noted, that from the fourth quarter of last year or the first quarter of last year, it is really a steep fall. But then, if you look at the numbers, they have been steadily declining. In fact, it is not a sudden decline. Therefore, there are some fundamental factors operating which is slowing down the growth of the economy. It has been compounded by demonetization. I cannot attribute the entire 2% decline or a little more than 2% decline only to monetization or GST.
Okay.
I think there is a clear fundamental trend which is slowing down the growth, and that is where we need to address.